Good morning, everyone. Boker Tov. It is a delight to have you with us, and it is very exciting to kick off a new season of Breakfast with the Rabbi. We have some very interesting topics for you today and in the upcoming months. So let's get started. This morning's topic is entitled Music in the Synagogue. May just have some tea before we get underway, as is our tradition. Music has always been an integral part of the Jewish worship experience, going back to ancient days. In the book of Shemot, in Exodus, Miriam the prophetess takes a tambourine in her hand, and all the women follow her, dancing with tambourines as well, to offer thanks to God for the miracle of the Sea of Reeds splitting. In the first and second temples, musical instruments were a regular part of the avodah, the services which took place each day, including Shabbat and Yom Tov. Now, you may find this strange, since musical instruments are forbidden on Shabbat and on Chagim, on Yom Tov. So the Talmud states that the sages prohibited playing musical instruments, for they were concerned that a person might come to fix the instrument. Now, this is not a far-fetched concept, by the way. One of my children recently began to take violin lessons, and the first day that she began to play, one of the strings detached, and she had to have it repaired. Furthermore, a musician often must tune an instrument so that it will work properly. The obvious question is, if music is prohibited on Shabbat and Yom Tov, how is it permissible in the Holy Temple? Good question, right? So the answer is because of the principle of Ein Shvut b'Mikdash. Let me explain. There are two types of prohibitions on Shabbat. One which is biblical, for example, starting a fire, something like that. The others are rabbinic enactments. The latter, known as Shavut, did not apply to the worship in the Holy Temple. In other words, instrumental music is prohibited on Shabbat, but was permitted as it pertains specifically to the service in the ancient Holy Temple in Jerusalem. So how does this apply to contemporary times? Should we play musical instruments in our synagogues on Shabbat and Yom Tov? So the simple answer is no, because the principle of a rabbinic enactment being suspended during a service applied only in the Beit HaMikdash, the ancient temple which we no longer have today. The two temples in Jerusalem have been destroyed, and we await the rebuilding of the third temple with the coming of the Messiah, God willing. And at that time, we will once again use instruments during services. However, those who wish to advocate for instruments being played at services today may argue that the contemporary synagogue is considered, according to the Talmud, a mikdash me'at, a miniature temple, and the concept of ein shavut b'mikdash should extend to our houses of worship today as well. Now, I am in no way giving a heter, a dispensation, but if someone wanted to give a heter, that is the argument they would likely use. Now, there is another issue that must be considered, and that is the concept of not following the ways of Gentiles. I spoke about that on the head covering video. I posted a link below. The book of Leviticus states, "And in their customs shall you not walk." Now, the great professor Louis Ginsburg, of blessed memory, who is also the great nephew of one of the most important rabbis who ever lived, the Vilna Gaon, who is also a relative of mine, which I guess that may even make Ginsburg my relative as well. So many people don't know, but Louis Ginsburg had a book of responsa. I am proud, by the way, to be one of the few who has access to the responsa of the great Professor Louis Ginsburg of blessed memory. Now, he addresses the issue of imitating the Gentiles in one of his responsa called "The Use of the Organ in the Synagogue." Here are some of the things he said. I will now paraphrase. In the last 2,000 years, since the destruction of the temple, instrumental music was unknown at divine services. It was only since the last 100 years when Reformed Jews introduced the organ. Now, keep in mind, this responsum was written in the late 1940s, I believe. Ginsburg goes on to say, and I quote, "It was due to the conscious imitation of Protestant services." He argues that Jews have never thought of using the organ in places like Russia, where the Greek Orthodox faith dominates, because it was entirely unknown. At the end of his responsum, he addresses the question of permitting a non-Jew, meaning a Gentile, to play the organ at services, and he states that such a practice, and I quote, "would be contrary to the spirit of Jewish services." Now, I would like to add another matter which was not addressed, and that is the concept called marit ayin. We are obligated to avoid even the appearance of violating Jewish law. Having a non-Jew play an instrument for a congregation on Shabbat would certainly fall under that category. Naturally, some people would be led to believe that a Jew is the one playing the music, since it is taking place in a synagogue. Now, what about other instruments besides the organ? Would they have the same status as the organ as far as Jewish law is concerned? Good question. Instruments which have become popular today, the guitar, violin, recorder, clarinet, etc., are common in contemporary churches and would therefore have the same halachic problems which the organ presents. Based on everything we discussed, I think it's fair to say that playing musical instruments at our present-day services certainly raises serious halachic questions. Even if you believe that it is technically permissible, you still must acknowledge that it is a very questionable practice. Now, people also ask about whistling on Shabbat. It's a good question. Whistling with the use of an instrument or whistle is forbidden. Whistling a tune with one's mouth, however, is permissible and analogous to singing a tune according to the Magen Avraham. In other words, things you do with your mouth are all fine. Once you start using instruments and things like that, then you have a problem. Because as we said before, it may break, you may have to fix it, you may have to tune it, etc., etc. Before we conclude, there is a much more important question which must be addressed beyond the technical halachic issue, and that is whether musical instruments add a meaningful dimension to worship services today. Now, I want to be a bit personal. I want to speak from personal experience. On the occasions which I have attended a liberal service either in person or Zoom, I have never been taken by the bands that play music during services. Firstly, on a practical level, I feel they drown out any singing that might take place by people sitting in the congregation. Secondly, it always appeared to me that no matter how beautiful the music, the people in the congregation seem to have little recognition as to what is going on. There is something significant which I believe is diluted in the process of prayer when you have either several instruments, few instruments, or even someone front and center strumming a guitar. At my congregation, we once conducted a bar mitzvah service on a Sunday. It also happened to have been Rosh Chodesh. Obviously, the laws of Shabbat and Yom Tov are not in effect on such a day. And I decided that I would play my guitar for a few of the pieces of the beautiful collection of Psalms known as Hallel, which are recited on Rosh Chodesh, at least customarily. I must be honest. I am no Jimi Hendrix, to say the least. I'm not the most stellar guitar player in the world. But I thought it might add something to the service. Following the service, I asked the bar mitzvah boy and his parents what they thought of the guitar accompaniment. And they said, Rabbi, the guitar was okay, but we really enjoyed the parts in which everyone participated and chimed in to sing, and those were not the parts that you played the guitar for. From that experience, I learned that music during services, instrumental music, do not do much to encourage congregational participation. During the 19th and 20th centuries, many large congregations had exceptional chazanim, great cantors. People would often choose a congregation based on who the cantor was, believe it or not. Chazanut was a huge phenomenon at one time. Today, obviously, it's not. You have concerts, but it's really of a bygone era. I personally am a fan of some chazanim, by the way, and I certainly was when I was growing up, and continue to sing certain cantorial pieces today in moderation. Our congregation is not a place with too many big cantorial pieces because of the reason we're talking about now. The problem was that services became a spectator sport. You have to understand, prayer is not something you can subcontract to someone else, even if that person is more learned or a better singer than you are. Prayer is avodah shebalev, the service of the heart. The words we say must be placed upon our hearts. Every individual in the congregation must be fully engaged in the service. Berov Am Hadrat Melech, says the book of Mishlei, the book of Proverbs, the king's glory is in a multitude of people. The technical term for a prayer leader is Shaliach Tzibor, which means messenger of the community. The role of a prayer leader must be to galvanize every voice in the Kehillah to join in. That is what makes prayer meaningful. One person strumming the guitar or chanting beautiful melodies in an operatic voice does not accomplish that task. Now, I just want to clarify that this is not an indictment on all cantors, God forbid. I know some who do an excellent job encouraging participation, But those are actually clergy who work hard to understand the needs of their flock. The same applies to rabbis, by the way. We too must see ourselves as messengers of the community rather than mere performers. In our congregation, we do a few English readings not to substitute, but rather to supplement the Hebrew. And while this practice might seem a bit controversial, it does help people with a limited background become comfortable with the prayer experience. Obviously, that is not for every shul, but it can go a long way in places where not everyone is fully observant or well tutored in Jewish practice. Psalm number 150 speaks about all the instruments which were used to praise God in the Holy Temple. The horn, the harp, and so on. And finally, it ends off with the most powerful instrument which we are each endowed with, and that is our neshama, the soul. It ends off with the words, Kol haneshama tehalel yah, hallelujah. Let every living soul praise God. Friends, may we each be given the strength to nurture our souls so that we can offer sincere prayer to the Holy One and ultimately make this world a better place.
Hallelujah.